When I was younger, I was super into all things paranormal. I used to love watching horror films, tried Ouija boards, going to haunted houses, and of course, telling ghost stories. It wasn't until I was 13 that strange things actually started happening to me personally, and that fascination shifted into a slight fear of the unexplained. Back in the day, my parents used to work in the city, so most mornings it would just be my sister and I left to get ready for school alone. One morning, my sister, who's 2 years older, and I were downstairs on the main floor when we heard it. The faint, yet familiar sound of my sister's music box playing in her bedroom. Instantly fearful, my sister and I still somehow managed to build up the nerve to investigate. Back to back, we began walking up the stairs. As soon as we made it to our doorway, the music came to a halt. The tiny bear atop her music box was now motionless, facing us with a seemingly innocent smile. My sister and I hadn't heard that small tune in years. Unsettled, we stood there in the doorway for a moment, or just until the phone rang and startled us out of our confusion. My sister answered, and we were both relieved to hear the sound of my mom's voice on the other line. As she began explaining what had just happened to my mom, she slowly raised her hand to point at the wall in front of her. Did you just see that? Something or someone just went through the wall, she said, her voice shaking. She genuinely looked terrified. Now, just to clarify, I've always been fascinated by the supernatural, but doubted that my sister was able to actually see a ghost. As fascinated as I was by the idea, I didn't think it would happen like that. 8 a.m. in the daylight. I didn't think that it happened. So, as I was convinced my sister was just playing a prank on me, I begged her to stop so we could just leave for school. Insisting that she saw something, and unwavering from that fact, she had convinced me to follow her into the adjacent room to hers, to see if there was actually something there or not. In the next room was a spare bedroom with a closet on the side opposite my sister's room. I huffed and walked towards the closet, yanking the door open as I started to lose my patience for the whole thing. As I opened the doors, however, they began to slowly inch closed immediately after my release of the handles. Confused, I closed the closet, and surely enough, it would slowly reopen. Whatever I did, the closet would react in reverse. I'd open it, it'd close, and vice versa. My skin crawled, and my sister and I ran out of the house. This particular instance was several years ago, back when I used to have a math tutor in high school. Once a week, every Friday after school, I'd have a tutoring session at the library by my house. It started at 3:30 and class would let out around 3, so I was often early. Before my session one afternoon, I went to the washroom and noticed a woman go into the last stall. When I exited my stall to wash my hands, I noticed the last stall was vacant, but I also hadn't heard the woman leave. Thinking I was losing my mind, I shook it off and left to meet my tutor. After my session, it was about an hour later and I was walking home, when I started to sense that I wasn't alone. It felt as though someone was walking about 5 paces behind me, but I never felt the need to check. Subconsciously, I think I knew it wasn't really someone there. I made it home, and because I'm a weirdo, stood behind my brother in the garage as he was working at our workbench trying to freak him out. After not getting the reaction I wanted, my brother several years older, it would take a bit to actually scare him. I went into the house. Upon entering, I started noticing a woman standing in the back corner of each room I entered or passed by. She would just be standing there, motionless and expressionless. For whatever reason, I wasn't actually afraid at the time, but rather curious. I went back downstairs to explain this all to my brother so he could tell me I was just seeing things. I began explaining this person I kept seeing, and as I began describing her, my brother started to nod and started asking questions about what she looked like. I instantly got goosebumps over my whole body and a chill went down my spine as he, in great detail, described the exact same woman I had seen all afternoon. I stood there speechless as my brother's face fell and he asked, Why do you think I didn't turn around in the garage earlier? I thought it was her. Not that I've ever mentioned it to my brother since, but I'm almost certain neither of us have ever seen her again.
So when I was about 17, my family had just moved back to Canada from living in the USA. It was a bit sudden, and being a family of 6, it was a little bit of a scramble to find a place to house all of us before the snow hit. So, my mom and dad decided to live in an old house that my grandpa had on his property, just for the duration of the approaching winter ahead. The house was my great uncle's, and my grandpa skidded from my brother's property to his place. Now my grandpa has 2 quarter sections, and this house is tucked way back away from the main house, so the powers ran from the main house, and with it being so far away, there is no running water. This house is old, so to add to the running water, there also isn't heat, only a wood stove. Just to give you an idea of where we were living in. Me, being a 17-year-old, I often stayed in town, and didn't stay there very often, not just because it was a pain, with the no water and heat, but because shit was creepy. I specifically remember the first time it happened. I was in my bed. I was the only one who would stay downstairs. With the wood stove, everyone wanted to sleep upstairs since it was warmer. So I was just starting to fall asleep, and I started to feel the room get really heavy. I remember the feeling of not being alone. The doorway didn't have a door on it. It only had a beaded curtain, and I could feel it standing there. I then remember having the feeling of total fear rush over me and frozen to my core with it. Then, it moved closer, and I felt the bed move and someone crawl right beside me, not in a way that was super noticeable, but in a sneaky, slow, sloth-moving type of way. I specifically remember wanting to vomit with fear. Then, I felt it, the feeling of an unshaven face rub against mine. I lost my damn mind. I scrambled out of bed, holding my blanket, and ran up the stairs to my parents' room. I was so out of my mind with fear that I couldn't even scream. I slept on the floor with my dad's side of the bed. The next morning, Mom was wondering why her 17-year-old daughter was curled up at the foot of her bed, and I told her what happened. Later that morning, we walked over to my grandpa's house to have breakfast and go chat. My mom brought up my wild story. My grandpa and grandma silently listened, as my mom was laughing at the last bit of the story. My grandparents got really serious and turned to each other. Apparently, this has been an issue in the old house, and they didn't want to tell us, hoping we didn't acknowledge it, then it wouldn't bother us. I can honestly say it didn't feel angry or upset. It just wanted to cuddle. I didn't stay there much after that. I moved in with a cousin in town.
This happened to me back in 2013. I was 18 at the time. I was a healthy, normal woman by all accounts, and lived in a suburb of South Florida. Just at that juncture in my life, I was moving up north to University of Florida, which is in Gainesville. Aside from the university, it was a very boring town, mostly nothing up there. I had noticed that before moving there, and during my time there, once a month, always on the same night, I think the first Sunday of every month, I wouldn't be able to sleep. Without fail, I couldn't sleep and I would toss and turn all night. Sometimes after those nights, I would wake up with something strange on my body. Once, on my lower spine, right on the cord, I woke up with a large red bump perfectly centered. It wasn't itchy like a bug bite, and it was unlike a pimple. Another time I woke up with a scar across my lower abdomen. It was long, and unlike a scratch, it was brown like a cauterized scar. But it left my body within a day or two, just like a scratch might have. On one such Sunday, my boyfriend happened to be spending the night. It was my parents' rule that he would sleep in a separate bedroom, but before he went off to his room, he laid next to me in my bed for a little while and we talked. He was saying something when suddenly he went quiet and looked behind him. I asked what was the matter, but he shrugged it off. He went to his room and we both tried to sleep. However, like usual on these nights, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. A feeling of dread prevented me from sleeping. I got restless and decided to go sleep in the room with my boyfriend, hoping I might be able to relax with him there. But still, I couldn't sleep. Nearly dozing off, only to awake in a fright, which was so uncharacteristic. I gave up and went back to my own room until I suddenly gave in and fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, I told my boyfriend that I couldn't sleep all night. I felt like something was coming to get me. He told me at that moment, the previous night when he suddenly fell silent mid-conversation, he thought something was outside my window. He said for whatever reason, the first thing that came to his mind was aliens, and it froze him in fear. He also told me that shortly after I had returned to my room in the middle of the night, he was disturbed by a loud static noise and felt vibrations in the air. After a few months, those routine, once-a-month sleepless nights stopped and never returned. I still don't know what it was all about, or if it was even anything, but that night put both of us on edge.